What's up guys? Today we're looking at a beautiful $2,500 streaming and gaming PC. Now there is one quick thing I want to tell you guys about this PC. It's certainly not the best performance PC you could get for $2,500. A lot of the budget went towards upgradability and aesthetic choices, which actually is great considering there's a whole new line of graphics cards coming out really soon. But yeah, you have a super high-end motherboard, a high wattage power supply, and of course, a beautiful looking PC. Okay, let's get started first with the motherboard, the Gigabyte Z690 Aero G. This is a 100% future-proof motherboard. It also comes with Wi-Fi, which is always really nice to have. Our first step is removing the motherboard from its anti-static bag and placing it directly onto its box. And then satisfyingly remove all those plastic stickers from surfaces. And wow, the aesthetic theme of this motherboard perfectly matches with the theme of the rest of this build. Moving on, we have the CPU, the Intel i7-12700K, a very fast, versatile, unlocked CPU with 12 cores and 20 threads. On the motherboard, unhinge and open the CPU bracket and place the i7 into its socket. There should be a golden triangle on the bottom left, which will match up with a golden triangle printed onto the motherboard. Next up, we have the memory, the Corsair Vengeance RGB Pro, 4 sticks of 16GB 3200 MHz RAM. Not only is this a lot of fast RAM, but it's also pretty aesthetically pleasing. Pop open all those RAM retention brackets and slowly insert all the RAM sticks into their slots. And don't worry, that little bit of bending did not damage anything. Now let's get to the storage, the Samsung 970 EVO Plus 2TB edition. Remove this screw here holding down the heatsink and locate this M2 screw that came with the motherboard. That's what we'll use to fasten the SSD into place. Apply some pressure until the drive is all the way in and then fasten it into place using that M2 screw. Then grab that heatsink that we took off earlier and take this blue plastic piece off of the bottom. Then you can just reinstall the heatsink back into its original spot. Now let's start putting everything into the case, the Lian Li 011 Dynamic. Oftentimes I get people asking if they need to use this exact case. I know a lot of you don't like the Lian Li 011 because it's a pretty big case, but yeah, you totally can use a different case if you'd like. Just make sure it's an ATX mid or full tower. Micro or mini ATX would not work. Anyway, remove all the panels from the Lian Li 011 so that we can get installing. Also remove this bracket in the back so we can remove the hard drive case, unless you're of course installing hard drives. For this build, I didn't choose any, but if you want to install some, you totally could if you'd like. Then put that bracket back into its original position. Next up is the power supply, the Corsair RM850 80+ gold certified supply. You don't necessarily need all that wattage, however, 850 watts gives you a lot of potential future upgrading comfort. I've used this exact supply in 3 different builds now, and I can assure you it is a very high quality, high efficiency power supply. The cables we'll be using in this build are the 24-pin ATX power connector, 2 CPU power connectors, 1 PCIe power connector, and 1 SATA power connector. You can then go ahead and plug those into their labeled slots. Now it's time to install it into the case. We're going to fasten the power supply using these exact screws, which come with the bag that came with the case. Now let's put the motherboard in the case. Line that pre-installed I/O shield up with the I/O cutout, and you should be pretty much good to start fastening the motherboard into place. In this box you'll find this bag, which has these screws, which are what you'll be using to fasten the motherboard. Next up, let's unbox the cooler, as there's one part in there in specific that we want to install onto the motherboard right now. In that box, you'll find the CPU backplate. That gets installed, yep, you guessed it, behind the CPU socket. Once that's installed, get this bag, which came with the cooler, and locate these screws. We're going to use these screws to fasten that backplate. Get them as tight as you can using your fingers. Now let's get to work on the NZXT Air RGB2 fans. In my opinion, these are some of the most aesthetically pleasing fans out there right now, and these absolutely fit the theme of this build. They're definitely a little bit on the pricey side, but to me, to get that aesthetic flair, they are worth it. So grab a fan and locate the in and out headers. Then locate this cable and grab the in connector. This is going to be plugging into the in header on the fan. Next, locate this cable right here and take the out connector and plug that into the out header on the fan. And now we're finally going to install this fan into the case. And we'll be using these screws that came with the fans. Next, locate this cable coming out of the fan. It should be labeled in. This will plug into the in header on the next fan. Then locate the out header on that same fan, and then grab another in-out cable, plugging that out connector into the out header. Then you can go ahead and screw that fan into place. Coming out of that second fan will be another one of those in cables. This you're going to want to plug into the in header on the third fan. And then you can install that third fan. And now we have the 3 fans installed, but we still have a bit of wiring to deal with. So coming out of all 3 of those fans will be these 4-pin fan connectors. We'll be linking all of those together using this exact cable. Plug all of the male fan connectors into the female connectors. Then take the other end of that cable and plug it into the fan hub. The fan hub comes with the fans. Then locate this cable coming out of the bottom fan and plug it into the hub. And now we're done with all that confusing fan wiring. Now let's direct our attention to the wires coming out of the power supply, starting with the 24-pin ATX power connector. Route this through the middle top cutout and plug it into this large connector right here. Make sure the notch is facing the right side. Next up, we're going to plug in the CPU power cables. These are going to route through the top right cutout and then into the connector on the very top left of the motherboard. You'll know they're properly installed when those notches on the top click into place. Now we're going to get to work on some of the front panel connectors, starting with the HD audio cable. That goes through the bottom left cutout and then into the audio header. Next, locate this USB 3.0 cable, route it through the top middle cutout and then into the USB 3.0 header. Now for the USB-C cable, this gets routed through the bottom middle cutout and then into the USB-C connector, which can be found right below the USB 3.0 connector. Next up, the front panel connector, which luckily is integrated all into one connector, so it definitely won't be difficult to plug in. This goes into the left side of that bottom right header. Now it's time to get started on installing the CPU cooler. This is probably the most difficult part of this build. First up, lay out your radiator in this exact orientation and install that bracket we just took out of the case. The screws you'll be needing for this installation process can be found in the AIO box. Now we're going to install the fans using those included long screws. Make sure you're installing the fans exactly how I am, on the proper side and the right orientation. Then link together the fans using these tiny in-out cables. Next up, grab this cable and plug the in connector into the rightermost fan. Next, grab this big jumble of cables and locate these 3 connectors right here. Coming out of the fans, you'll find these 4-pin fan cables. Plug all 3 of them into those female connectors. Next, grab this connector, which should be coming out of the rightermost fan, we just plugged it in, and then plug it into this connector here. You can find it with that big jumble of cables that I showed off earlier. Also coming out of that big jumble of cables will be this connector, which you'll plug directly into the pump. Now it's time to mount the radiator to the top of the case. To do this, all we're really doing is replacing that bracket that we took out earlier and then refastening the 2 screws that held it in place. And now it's time to install the pump. Ensure to remove the plastic at the bottom and then install the pump in this exact orientation with the tubes coming out of the bottom. You'll be using these fat screws right here to fasten it into place. You can find them in the AIO box. And now you're going to have a huge mess of cables coming out of the AIO and pump. We're just going to route all of them towards the back of the case to make things look a little cleaner. Now locate this cable coming out of the pump and plug it into the header labeled CPU OPT. Next, get this cable, which comes with the AIO box, and plug the USB end into the pump and route the other end through the top cutout right here. We're going to plug it into the USB 2.0 header later. First though, let's start powering these male SATA connectors. Any and all male SATA connectors that look naked like this should be connected to a female SATA power connector. So find all of them and connect them to the white female SATA connectors. There will be one coming out of the AIO, one coming from the case, and one coming out of the NZXT fan hub. Next, locate this fan connector right here that should be coming out of the pump and plug it into the header labeled CPU fan. Next, find this USB cable coming out of the fan hub and route it through the bottom middle cutout and plug it into the USB 2.0 header. And then plug in the USB 2.0 cable that's connected to the pump via that USB cable, the one that I said we'd come back to later. And now it's finally time for the graphics card, the Gigabyte RTX 3060 Ti. The 3060 Ti is super versatile. I actually use a 3060 Ti in my main build, and it gets the job done for every single task, as long as you're not doing super high-end 4K gaming. So first up, remove these 2 screws right here, and then remove these 2 brackets, push down on this retention tab, and then gently install the 3060 Ti. You'll know it's properly installed when the retention tab clicks back up. After that, reinstall these 2 screws that we removed earlier. And last but not least, we'll have to supply some extra power to the graphics card. So get those PCIe power cables coming out of the power supply and plug them into your 3060 Ti. And just like that, your build is finished and it's ready for Windows. Oh, and one quick thing, if you want some improved airflow, you totally could add 3 120mm fans at the bottom of the case. You don't need to, but I do recommend it. All right, now on to Windows. To install Windows, you'll want to get a USB drive that is at least 8 GB in size and then plug it into another Windows device. Head over to Google and type in Windows 10 ISO and then click the first link that comes up. It should be Microsoft.com. Now, if you can't find this, you can just click the link in my description. When that's downloaded, you can go ahead and run it. It'll take you to this page and you'll click Accept. Then it'll do some loading, and then you'll want to click Create Installation Media and click Next. Ensure that it's your language of preference, 64-bit, click Next, and then make sure USB flash drive is selected. And make sure it's that same USB drive that you plugged into the Windows device. And then it'll take a hot minute to get installed. So while that's loading, admire your beautiful PC, take a bunch of pictures, send them to your friends. Alright, and once it's installed onto the USB drive, plug it into your newly built PC, boot it up, and then it'll take you to this screen. Make sure it's your language of preference and then click Next. Then click, yep, you guessed it, Install Now. Then read the applicable notices and license terms, make sure you memorize every single individual word, click I accept, and click Next. Then go to Custom Install Windows Only. Select your 2TB SSD, click Next, and then it will finally install Windows 10. Then it'll take you to that standard Windows setup process, which I'm sure you guys can do on your own. And when you complete the setup process and it takes you to your desktop, it's time to activate Windows. So head over to digitalchillmart.com, the best place to get cheap and reliable Windows 10 and 11 license keys. Select Windows 10 Home or Pro, whichever you chose during the installation, and use RUTEC as your coupon code for a 50% discount. The activation code is given to you immediately upon purchase, so now head over to the search bar, type in Activation, click Activation Settings, and click the button that allows you to enter your product key. This, of course, is where you'll enter that key from Digital Chill Mart. And now with Windows activated, we're going to activate XMP, which will allow our RAM to run at the proper speed. Boot up the PC and spam the delete key until you're brought to this page. Click the button that says XMP disabled, and that'll put your RAM to 3200 MHz. Then you can save and exit. And lastly, I'll have the links for all the necessary drivers in my description. All you have to do is download them, run them, and then you'll be good. And last but not least, we have the 4K and 1440p benchmarks. The 3060 Ti and i7-12700K is a beautiful pair for modern 1440p and 4K gaming. I personally still use a 3060 Ti in my main rig with a 4K monitor, and I have no complaints. It absolutely gets the job done, especially with games compatible with DLSS upscaling. But yeah, all of these benchmarks were recorded using a capture card, so this is the exact performance you should expect to see when using this computer. Alrighty, now we'll just play some nice soothing music for the rest of this benchmarking segment. So yeah, that will wrap it up for today's build tutorial video. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like. Have any comments or questions, drop a comment below. And of course, if you enjoy the content you're seeing, I would really appreciate it if you dropped a sub. Thanks for watching. Peace out.